Good day and welcome back to the shed. I've just finished reading a sequel. It's actually the second sequel I finished back to back. So as I was getting ready to share my thoughts, I thought why not just share my thoughts on all the sequels that I've read to date this year and sort of compare them to the original to see whether or not they're worth your time. So straight off the bat, we're going to go straight into one of the classics in Foundation and Empire. So this is the sequel to Isaac Asimov's Foundation, inaugural Foundation novel. There's quite a few in the series. There's Prelude and other authors have written Foundation novels as well. But this, I think, when it comes to sequels, Foundation and Empire is as good, if not better, than the original. So I'm not going to go into the whole plot overview, but if most of these books I have covered to date on the Sci-Fi Shed Ladder. But if you would like to see a full review of Isaac Asimov's Foundation and Empire, just drop me a note in the comments and I'll do my best to get to it. But needless to say, Foundation and Empire, the second of the original three, the trilogy, and I would have to say highly recommended. I would say it's on par, if not better, than the original. The other one I recently finished is Michael Moorcock's The Land Leviathan. Now, when I started reading this, I didn't realize it was actually a sequel. And it was a bit disappointing, to be honest. I wish I hadn't known, because this one, I would have to say, when it comes to sequels, I'm not quite sure if it is worth the read. I haven't read the original, but from what I've seen online with some of the comments, it seems to be pretty much much of a muchness. And the novel and the plot in this one, look, it was interesting. I did enjoy it. But I'd have to say, don't jump to the sequel like I did. Maybe start with the original. And I think from what I've read of the sequel, it's not one of Michael Moorcock's best works and probably not worth the read. Next on the list was a whole lot of Harry Harrison Death World novels. I'm holding up 3 here, and I've got 2 as well. Now, these I would have to say are definitely worth the read if you're a Pulp Fiction fan. So I enjoyed the original Death World, and I did enjoy the changes that the main protagonist goes through. It's almost like a different person every time one of these Death World novels comes up. But I did enjoy the sequels, and I would have to say that, yep, the Death World series are definitely worthwhile reading. Next on the list, I don't actually have it with me, but it was Eyes of the Void by Adrian Trzaskowski. Now, that is my last video review. Is it my last or next week? It's one of the two. You've either just seen it or it's actually coming up next week as a bit of a spoiler. But it was Eyes of the Void by Adrian Trzaskowski. And I've got to say that I enjoyed the series as a whole, and I would highly recommend reading the Final Architecture. It was definitely a very worthwhile space opera. The next on the list was N.K. Jemisin's The Broken Earth series, the second novel, which was called The Obelisk Gate. Now, I didn't have a whole lot of good things to say, and I've linked to my video review of the trilogy as a set. I'm not a big fan, so I'd have to say, you know, The Obelisk Gate was better than the 5th season for me, but overall, just a series that I would not recommend at all. Next on the list was always one of those really controversial novels in Frank Herbert's Dune Messiah. Now, this one is controversial because it's only a small novel and it's very different to what you have in Dune. But I think if you're a Dune fan and you really enjoyed the novel, I'd have to say that Dune Messiah, on its own right, I think is a fantastic novel. I think it goes into some really interesting areas. And for me, I'll vote this one the thumbs up. It gets the Sci-Fi Shed thumbs up. It would definitely be, I think, a great read. I really enjoyed it. I enjoy all the Dune sequels. I haven't read the others that were co-authored with Jay Anderson, I think it was. But I haven't read those. But I'd have to say all the Frank Herbert sequels are definitely worthwhile, worth your read. Next on the list, and one of the novels that is actually ranking pretty well on the Sci-Fi Share Ladder, was the sequel to Joe Haldeman's Forever War, In Forever Peace. Now, this one's an interesting one. I would have to say it is definitely not as good as the original. I've much more enjoyed Forever War than I did Forever Peace. But this one, I'm sort of sitting on the fence. I think it is still a very good novel. And if it was called something other than Forever Peace, linking it to that great piece of work, I think this on its own would actually be a pretty interesting novel. So I'd have to say, don't consider this one a sequel, but a book in the same universe. And I think it is worth the read. But yeah, it sort of doesn't really fall into that sequel category for me. But I'd have to say it's worth a read for its own right. Next on the list was a couple of Vernor Vinge novels, In A Fire Upon the Deep, A Fire Upon the Deep, and Deepness in the Sky. I'm holding up A Fire Upon the Deep here. But those two, I guess, were interesting sequels as well. Vernor Vinge is interesting. Sometimes I think it gets rather bloated. And if you like your space operas, especially vintage space operas, I'd have to say, yeah, the sequels are definitely worth the read as well. No real concerns or issues with those. The last and not least is Tar Tide Rising by David Brin. Now this was a sequel to Sundiver, the inaugural, Penguin book, I call them, right? The inaugural Uplift novels. And the sequel definitely gets a lot more accolades than what Sundiver did. It won a Hugo and or Nebula, or maybe both. I can't recall exactly. But I would have to say that this was one of those sequels that for me was definitely better than Sundiver. And I would have to say the Uplift war that came after, it lifted the bar again. So if you enjoyed Sundiver by David Brin, I'd say definitely get on to the sequels, because for my humble opinion, for what it's worth, they are definitely the better of the novels in that Uplift series. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that. A bit of a fast-paced, quick look at some sequels. What are some of the sequels that you've read that you've really enjoyed, that actually outdid the first? Do any come to mind? Are there some novels that you wish were just finished at the first and they'd left it at that because they left a sour taste in your mouth? Some that come to mind are the Ringworld novels, for example, and maybe I should have mentioned some of those. But some of the Ringworld sequels didn't really do it for me. Same with the Rendezvous with Rama. Some of the sequels didn't really do it for me. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. So I hope you enjoyed that little break from our Sci-Fi Shed Ladder, where I've been ranking all the Hugo and Nebula award-winning novels, just something a little bit different. But we'll be back to the ladder next week when I'm looking at another interesting novel that will be interesting to see exactly where it ranks. So I hope you hit that like and subscribe and notification bell and do all of that kind of stuff so you don't miss out. And until next time, I've been Peter. This has been a hot and muggy morning in the Sci-Fi Shed, and I'll see you next time in the shed.